Might as well get started then. So, The Legend of Art, A Link Between Worlds. I was supposed to have like some whimsy picture with the cover art of Zelda, but ran out of time. So, food and games. So, the reason I chose food is perhaps a less obvious choice than I think most people would go to movies first to compare games because it has that audio and visual relationship. So, using food, I thought it was pretty interesting that I found these comparisons. So, I felt that maybe it'd make for a better talk. And I like cooking. I watch shows like Top Chef and stuff like that, and that's when I started picking up these similarities with games. So, yeah, here I am. Okay, so before I get into it, let's talk about how you're experiencing the food and how you're going to experience the game. So with food, you have to be alone. You can't be anyone around you. So then all your focus is on the meal, and you're not obligated to speaking to another person. So then, if you're alone and you're eating, you're not doodling on your phone or something else. Just all your focus is just on the plate. And it's going to be the same with games. When you're playing games, you have to be alone. And that's not to imply that you can only play single-player games. It's fine to play multiplayer games, but it's so long as you're talking about the game. So if you're playing Counter-Strike, you're saying, two guys at B, one guy's at mid, and you're not asking your teammates, how was your day, and things like that. And again, this is to focus on the game and the experience and nothing else. Actually, before I get into that, there's a couple. I should have one more slide to explain some terms I'm going to use. So I'm going to use a term like components and concepts, which I'll interchange. And so, say you have a food dish that has multiple components, say turkey and mashed potatoes. You have two components there. And each component is composed of multiple ingredients. So the component of mashed potatoes has potatoes, butter, cream, and those are all ingredients that compose the component. And it's the same with games. You can have components like shooting and, let's say, exploring. Shooting itself is composed of multiple ingredients. So say the action of shooting, then you have reloading, and then you also have switching to different weapons. So those are all ingredients that compose shooting. Okay, so the first topic is balance, also known as experiencing one thing for too long sucks. So imagine you have this grilled cheese sandwich. It's pretty good. It tastes pretty good. And it's composed of bread, butter, and cheddar cheese. So that first bite you take, when you're focusing on the flavor, it's salty, rich, chewy, gooey, crispy. It's a damn good bite. And the second bite, same thing. It's salty, rich, chewy, crispy. It tastes good. Third bite, same thing. And it tastes pretty good. So then fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on. Hopefully you see a pattern there. Until you get to a point where I'll speak in first person here. Well, I get to a point where I'm done half. But I've been experiencing the same flavors and textures the whole time. And the texture is like something's crunchy or crispy or soft in your mouth. So then, with each bite that I take, the enjoyment goes down because I'm sort of getting tired of experiencing the same thing. It's like I'm getting exhausted of eating this one thing. And then when I'm done half the sandwich, I'm still hungry, but I'm not really enjoying the meal anymore. So then when I eat the rest of the sandwich, I'm kind of eating it without enjoyment, and I just want to get full. So, Call of Duty. Call of Duty is a game about shooting things. I'm not about to rip it apart or anything, just like, it fits the scenario. People have already ripped it apart. So, say you're playing a mission in Call of Duty single player. The first area, the soldiers show up in front of you. They start shooting you. Naturally, you're probably going to shoot back. So And the shooting in Call of Duty is it's loud, it's intense, it is fast. And so it's pretty engaging experience, I find. But then you get to the second area, it's same thing happens. Soldiers show up, they start shooting you, and so the shooting is loud, intense, it's fast, and it's fairly engaging. Third area, same thing happens, loud, intense, fast. It's kind of engaging. And fourth and fifth, and so on. So then I'm done half the mission, say, and I've been experiencing the same thing over again. Soldiers show up in front of me, and I start shooting. It's loud, it's fast. So, and with each repetition, my enjoyment goes down, and it gets to a point where I kind of get numb to the experience, say after 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So I still feel like playing games, but I'm not enjoying it as much, so the remainder of my playtime, I'm just sort of going through the motions. So in both cases, we can have an experience that if you experience something too much, then the enjoyment goes down over time. So then back to the grilled cheese, if we want to introduce balance, then you want to add something like a pickle. And if you've never tried having pickles with grilled cheese, I highly recommend it. It's pretty damn good. So, talking about why it's balance, the grilled cheese, it's mostly the butter and the cheese that comes through. The bread is neutral, so you don't really taste it that much. And both the butter and the cheese are pretty fatty, and that fat is heavy and greasy. And what that fat does is it kind of coats your tongue, and it stops other flavors from coming through that much, and it just sort of, it weighs you down and makes you feel tired. But then the pickle, it's pickled in vinegar, and vinegar is really acidic. And what kind of flavor that vinegar is, it's bright and it's sharp, it just like punches your tongue with a bunch of flavor. So what the vinegar does is it cuts through the fat, and then it sort of brightens up your taste buds. And so if we interchange through, say, having a bite of the grilled cheese and a bite of the pickle, then we create some sort of balance, so we're not getting tired as quickly. And that way we enjoy the whole meal more, rather than getting tired. So now, Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 is one of my favorite games, and like Call of Duty, it does have fast, loud, and intense shooting. But the navigation in Half-Life 2 isn't trivial actually at all. So you'll have areas, say, where you know where to go, but you don't know how to get there. So you see the door across the room, but maybe there's electrified water underneath you. So you have to find a way to cross the room without getting damaged too much or dying. And then there's also environmental puzzles, which, they hinder your progression until you figure out what to do. So, in compared to Call of Duty, say, once you've cleared an area, usually there's a waypoint that you have to run to, and there's not really much interest in doing that. So in Half-Life, you have this swapping between a scene of shooting and a scene of navigation. And so what the navigating part does, it's really calm, it's quiet, and it's slow paced. There's no meaning to rush through the area. It gives you time to explore and to think. And it's in direct contrast with the shooting, because the shooting is loud, intense, and fast. So then when you switch between the two, you don't get tired as quickly, and we've created balance. So then we enjoy the experience much more. So in both cases, in both food and with games, we introduced a new component that helped balance the dish or balance the game. And as a result, we enjoy the experience. So identity, or what is it about? So say you have a dish of sweet and sour shrimp, and I find it really well balanced. It has sweetness, sourness, which work really well together. Then it has like a soft, crunchy shrimp, and shrimp has its own flavor. So, and then you have the buttery rice to it. So altogether, I find it very well balanced, and it's pretty interesting to eat too. It's not something I have every day. But then let's add bacon, because everything tastes better with bacon, and it'll help the dish sell because it's familiar. So bacon itself is a pretty strong flavor. You know, it's salty, it's rich, it's chewy. It's hard to make bacon subtle on a food dish. And let's say we put like 3 strips of bacon on our dish. So that flavor from the bacon, that saltiness, that richness, that fattiness, it's going to overpower all the subtle flavors that are in the sweet and sour shrimp. And so where we wanted to have, say, bacon as a side dish that helped balance out the dish, it ends up overpowering all those other flavors. And all you taste is bacon. And it tastes good, but again, we get back to the balance issue. We're going to get tired from eating it. And also, I don't find it very interesting to eat. So the equivalent to bacon is, let's add guns to video games. Not that guns are a bad thing or anything, but, well, you'll see. So yeah, guns, they tend to treat as other combat mechanics that you have already in the game. And that's because guns have a certain range. Usually it's pretty long. And it gives you the ability to just take pot shots, where you just go into cover, pop out, and take a few shots, go back into cover. And so that's very low risk to the player. And also there's fairly dumb AI that, you know, they'll peek their head out from cover to see where you are or something. That's when you take your shot, and they die. And it ends up not being very interesting. So, here's a couple games that I think suffer from this syndrome. So the first one is The Darkness 2. And in the game, you have these 2 snake arms that you can attack and grab things. And there's also a mechanic that you need to stay out of the light because the light hurts you. And so, just thinking of those two, it sounds pretty cool to me. You know, it has its own sort of flavor to the game that makes it perhaps distinct. So then imagine a scenario where you grab a car door for cover. You can actually do that, I'm pretty sure. And then you navigate through the shadows so you don't get hurt. So you're getting close, you're closing in on an enemy, and then when you're close enough, you ditch the car door and then you attack. But then there's also guns in The Darkness 2, which, in my opinion, trivialize the combat, because you can just stand back, stay in some shadow, and peek around and just shoot at enemies. And yeah, it's not as interesting as the snake arms themselves. Crisis, everyone's favorite benchmark. So Crisis, for those that don't know, it's you have this very powerful suit of armor, and it gives you different abilities like super strength, super speed, cloak that makes you go invisible, and then you have a default armor mode. So you can use your fists in the game also. So just imagine that it has no guns and that you can only use your fists. So then imagine a combat scenario where a turret's shooting at you behind a fence, and there's cover between you and the turret. So then you can use, say, maximum speed or stealth to like move from cover to cover. You're getting closer to the turret, and then when you get to the fence, you can super jump over it using strength mode, and then close in on the guy on the turret and then punch him. But again, the guns trivialize any combat decisions that you want to make, because you can just stay back, shoot at the turret, and again, it's not very interesting. For this next game, I'm sorry if I offend any of you, but it is Bioshock. I like Bioshock too, so don't think I'm hating on Bioshock, but Bioshock has a variety of plasmids, and plasmids are like, they work like spells in Skyrim, where each has a unique ability. So let's look at the plasmids. It's like, you have telekinesis, which you can use to pick up objects and throw at people. You can freeze people in place. You can place a trap on the ground so when enemies step on it, it springs them up into the sky. You can electrocute people with bonus damage from the environment, from water. You can burn people from bonus damage from oil. You can enrage enemies so they attack other enemies, and you can place a decoy so you're not attacked yourself. And then, and then there's the guns, which it's not as okay, I'm going to use the word bad. I say a game like Crisis, which is like giant open fields and soldiers that you can see from very far away, so you can attack from very far away. But they aren't as interesting to use as plasmids because you just point and shoot and it creates instant damage. And they don't have, like, say, the control of the plasmids where you can freeze an enemy in place and attack another while the other enemy is thawing or something. So then, with both food and games, we introduce a component that sort of trivializes the identity of the other components that were already in place, and doesn't make the experience very interesting. With this title is trying to sound smarter than I am. So conceptual variation, multiple versions of the same component. So you have mashed potatoes that are mashed. Butter, salt, and cream are the ingredients that compose this component. But we can have many versions of mashed potatoes. So you can tie in another ingredient like garlic, and then you have garlic mashed potatoes. You can keep the potato skin on, and it'll create like a different sort of texture and give you something to chew on, also when you eat it. You can try mashing a third of the potatoes, or 3/4 rather, and then frying the other quarter to again have different textures, different flavors when you eat it. And you can substitute butter for chicken broth for a slightly different flavor, but it's also a little bit healthier to eat. So then, yeah, we have multiple versions of the same component. So jumping is a fairly well-known game mechanic, or game component rather. And it's pretty simple. It's move the entire body of the character up. But we have many versions of jumping. So you can tie in another game mechanic like a kick. So then you have a jump kick, like in Mortal Kombat. You can have a non-static height for your jump, so the longer you hold the jump button, the higher you jump, like in Mario. You can have a double jump, like in Super Metroid. And you can have a delayed jump, which rather than jumping as soon as you press the button, let's say your character has to hoist themselves up, and it takes half a second to do so. And that's like in Killzone 2. And it sort of gives like an extra weight, a weighty feel to the character. So then in both food and games, we can have a familiar concept like, say, jumping in mashed potatoes, but we can have multiple versions of it. Fine-tuning, getting something just right. So let's say a cook wants to create a tomato sauce to place on pasta. And they start with some basic ingredients. It's tomatoes, water, sugar, and salt. So after cooking it the first day, the cook finds it tastes fine, but the cook knows that it could be better because, say, they know how they want it to taste and where they want it to be, or they've tasted other tomato sauces, so they know that it can be more interesting to taste. So the second day, the cook cooks it again, and this time adds rosemary to it, and it tastes pretty good, so decides to keep it. The third day, the cook adds 10 olives to the tomato sauce, but finds that the flavor is a bit too strong from the olives. So the next day, instead the cook cuts the olives in half, so it's only 5 olives, and it turns out being better balanced. And the cook continues on and keeps at it for, say, however long they want. And in the end, they have something that's pretty close to what they want. It tastes pretty interesting, and there's a complexity to it and whatnot. So then, jumping in games again. So say you're developing a game and you want to add a jump to it. So the first day, you add a vertical boost in a straight direction, which it gets the job done for the jump, but it's not really, say, interesting to perform. And say the developer knows where the jump wants to be, either they know how the jump should feel, or they've experienced jumps from other games, so they know the experience of the jump could be better. So, day number 2. At first, the jump was coded with a pretty slow sort of gravity to it. So this time, the dev increases acceleration, so you jump fast and you land fast. And, the dev likes it, so he keeps it. Day 3, now we're adding some mid-air control. So you're not just jumping and you can't, say, make some micro adjustments in mid-air. And it feels okay, but it feels too much like, say, Oblivion, you guys have played, where you can just do hoops in the air before you land. So day 4, the dev cuts the mid-air control in half, so you're not doing hoops rather, but it feels kind of like Half-Life 2, say, if you played it, where you can make some mid-air adjustments, but you can't do hoops. So the dev likes this, so you keep it. And so on and so forth over the weeks, they continue fine-tuning until they have something that's pretty close to what they want, so they're happy with it. So in both food and games, we started with some basic component, but with fine-tuning, we're able to make it an experience that's closer to what we wanted. So unnecessary overlap, or too many components that feel the same. So say we have a dish that has pasta and mashed potatoes. The flavor, it tastes pretty good. There's nothing wrong with flavors or anything. But looking at each component, the pasta is soft and it's salty and it's buttery. The mashed potatoes are soft, salty, and buttery. So then, when we're eating the two, we have this balance issue. So we could say that one of these two isn't really needed. So let's say we can take away the mashed potatoes and sub it for something like garlic toast, which is crunchy, which helps balance the softness of the pasta. Now for games, say you're making some top-down action RPG, so like Diablo or Torchlight or something. And let's say right off the bat, you're going to give the player 2 abilities. One is a whirlwind that does area of effect damage. It hits everyone around the character, and it does instant damage. And say the second ability is a ground pound, which also does area of effect attack and instant damage. So again, we have this balance issue because the two are too similar to each other. We could say that we could just get rid of one of them, and we can say we can get rid of the ground pound and instead add like an instant single target attack. And then that way, the player doesn't have to face hordes of enemies to make Whirlwind useful. You can have hordes of enemies, but you can also have strong, say, sub-bosses. So then the single attack is much useful that way. And also add some variety to what you're experiencing. So with both food and games, we have components that are too similar to each other, so we can substitute them for something else. And editing, does each component have a purpose? So back to the sweet and sour shrimp. It's reminding you of what it does. Sweetness and sourness, soft crunch from the shrimp, and the buttery rice. And let's say the person who's cooking this has some preconception that all main dishes must have salad on them. So the cook adds a lettuce salad, and it has some honey mustard dressing on it. So we have these flavors from the sweet and sour shrimp, but then these are the flavors from the salad. And you can see there's plenty of overlap here, because the flavors and textures are too similar. And probably the only thing in the salad that I would say works is the onion, because the onion has a hard crunch to it, and it has a different flavor. So it doesn't need the entire salad for you to add the onion to the dish. So the salad is sort of trivial, so we really don't need it, so we can axe it. Now with the games, I'm going to focus on Halo, and I'm going to look at the first game because it's the one that I actually played recently with a friend. So Halo has this trinity of abilities going on. You can shoot things, usually single targets. You can throw grenades and it'll attack multiple opponents, and then it has a melee attack, which is pretty strong for closing in targets. And Halo also has crouching, so let's look at crouching. So potential uses for crouching based on Halo and some other like games that include crouching. So hiding behind low cover, but a lot of the cover in Halo is pretty tall. It's taller than your head, so there's really no need for that. And you also have a recharging shield, which on normal difficulty at least, and maybe on heroic, sort of trivializes taking cover in the first place. So we don't really need to hide behind low cover. It's useful for sneaking, but there is rarely a stealth section in Halo, and when there is, running already makes no noise, so there's no need to crouch. So no need to sneak and crouch. Increasing accuracy. In most games, crouching increases accuracy. But the gun spread in Halo is not affected by your movement. So it's not going to increase your accuracy by crouching. And crouch jumping. But, I'm going to talk about jumping next, so you'll see. So, at first glance, crouching isn't very useful. So we could say that crouching isn't needed that much in Halo. So jumping. Potential uses for scaling the environment, so jumping over, say, rocks and ledges and whatnot. But there's few instances where this is actually needed to progress. Usually, say there's like a fallen log in your way or a rock, you can always just run around it. And almost always the ground, say, slopes up to the area you need to go, or there's a ramp, stairs, elevators. So scaling the environment isn't really needed for jumping. It could be useful if there are more obstacles in your way, but there's not that many. And quick dodging for slow bullets could be useful for jumping, but most bullets do move too fast. And the only slow-moving one I can think of is the plasma pistol discharge that takes away all your shield, but I think I've tried jumping over that, but it still hits your feet or something. And it has a slight homing effect also. And so, well, actually that's subjective, I just thought. So, yeah. But, at first glance, jumping isn't very useful. So we could say that jumping isn't needed in Halo. And based on other FPS conventions, let's add leaning. So leaning is useful for seeing around the corner. And we'll assume that when you're doing this, your character is still visible. So it's not like Dishonored where, they can't see you. The motion tracker that's already there sort of trivializes the need to do that. But let's say the enemy isn't moving, or the enemy is moving and you just want to see what it is. So let's say you lean around the corner. Enemies in Halo don't have a cautionary state. So say in Metal Gear, if an enemy sees you, they'll go into like, what is that? And they'll try to investigate what they saw. But enemies in Halo don't have that. So say you lean around the corner, the enemy sees you, they're just going to attack you. So leaning around the corner is really the same as walking around the corner. So there's no need to lean to see around the corner. And another thing that it could be useful for is like leaning out to fire a couple shots and then leaning back into cover really quickly. But that implies your character is weak and that they cannot take a couple dozen shots. And they can because you have a recharging shield and you're a badass and you're powerful. So at first glance, leaning isn't very useful, so we're not going to add it. And so now let's add sprinting. And I know sprinting was added in Halo 4, but I'm focusing on the first Halo rather. So potential uses, so covering large ground, that's pretty useful for sprinting, but over half, I'd say, of the environments in Halo are pretty small, or like hallways and corridors and whatnot, or medium to small size rooms. So it's not really useful for that. Plus, when there are large areas, you have vehicles for that. So it's not very useful for large. Sprinting isn't very useful for large ground. It's useful for darting from cover to cover, but again, this implies your character's weak, they can't take a lot of fire, and again, recharging shields. And sprinting could be useful for dodging attacks, so bullets, but the bullets move too fast. I'm pretty sure the bullets move too fast for sprinting to be useful for this. Plus, enemies adjust their aim when you're sprinting. Pretty sure I experienced this in Halo 4, where they kind of lead you if you're sprinting, so they fire at you and you end up sprinting into their bullets. So that's not very useful. But sprinting could be useful for escaping a low health scenario. This has an interesting sort of, I guess, counter argument to that. Sprinting, and it encourages recklessness if you're able to do that pretty often, where say you just sprint into a group of guys, you lay them down with your fire, and you get to a pretty low health state, so then you try sprinting out. And if you're able to do that over and over without failing, then it sort of trivializes the challenge of the game. So I would say sprinting is not very useful, so it doesn't need to be added. So in both cases, in both food and game, we have components that don't really serve a purpose, so we could take them out and create a tighter experience. Progression, or experiencing new things over time. So there's a show called Iron Chef America. And for those that don't know the rules, they get a guest competitor, usually another chef, and they pit them against an experienced chef, an Iron Chef, and they are tasked to make 5 dishes at least in 60 minutes. And each dish must be based on some secret ingredient, which is revealed at the start of each battle. And a battle consists of, don't need to say that. So let's say there is a battle shrimp episode, where shrimp is a secret ingredient. And so these are the 5 plates that, say, one of the chefs is going to create. And for each of them, we're going to add fried shrimp. But from this, we get the balance issue, because you're experiencing the same thing over and over. So from this, it becomes apparent that we need some variety, so you don't get tired of eating those 5 dishes as quickly. And also you could say there's more possibilities of what you can do with shrimp. And it'll be really cool to showcase that, rather than just having fried shrimp. So then, let's say we have fried shrimp as the first dish of 5 courses, and then we have shrimp tartare, shrimp casserole, and so on as our other ones. So we have some variety now. So looking at these dishes, fried shrimp is a pretty heavy meal compared to the rest, since whenever you fry something, it usually weighs you down, and it's pretty greasy. So if we put it first, then when the people eat these 5 dishes, they're going to get satisfied and full too quickly from that heavy, rich, fried dish. So it becomes apparent from this that the order of which dish comes first is important. So now we put the fried dish as the 4th dish at the end of the meal, almost the end. And so we have this sort of progression now where you start small and you build up, and then you end, say, on a light note to sort of wash away that grease, because herbs are really nice for like the final thing you eat. It gets rid of all the aftertastes that perhaps aren't so pleasant when they sit in your mouth for half an hour or longer. And so by ordering the meals and having variety, the meal becomes much more satisfying. So now Portal. So for those that haven't played Portal, I don't know, but I'll explain it anyway. It plays two-link portals on surfaces like walls and floors and ceilings. You go in one and you come out the other, and that's both for you and, say, any object that you put through the portal. And momentum is conserved, so if you enter the first portal parallel, you come out the second portal also parallel, and at the same speed that you entered the first portal. So Portal has this thing called a portal fling, and it's actually what's shown in the pictures. So you gain speed from entering a horizontal portal placed on, say, a floor that's really pretty far below you. And you place another portal, say, on a wall that has, it's a pretty high wall. And when you exit from the second portal, all that momentum that you got from falling is carried through, so it like propels you very, very far and over some barrier that you're trying to get over. And I remember the first time I did this is pretty damn awesome. It is crazy, thrilling, and addictive. I remember reloading the save and doing it multiple times because I loved it so much. So let's say we have test chambers or puzzles, and each test chamber is its own contained puzzle. And in each of them, we have a portal fling. We sort of get a balance issue here again, because you're doing the portal flings, you're going to get sort of tired of doing that over and over, and you're not going to enjoy it as much. So from this, it becomes apparent that we need variety. And also to show the possibilities of what portals can do, since it's probably more than just portal flings that we can perform. So then we have portal flings in the beginning, and then we have some other concepts like placing portals, moving through portals, and then we have the complexity of each on the bottom there. And we have the most complex mechanic at the beginning of the experience. And it may not be that complex when you played it, but to a new player, it's pretty odd when you see like a perspective change when you go through a portal. At least that's how I felt really when I played it for the first time. So if you're putting the complex concept first, then it's possible that the opponents or the player is going to get overwhelmed too quickly, and then not really pay attention for the simple and the medium components. So it becomes apparent that the order is indeed important. So we now have the complex near the end, and there's more portals. That's what the ... is. More test chambers. So the complexity is further from the start of the game. So now we have this progression where we start simple. We just introduce the topic of portals to the player, and then we build up complexity and say, all right, you know how to do this, now did you know that you can do this? And it becomes much more engaging when the player doesn't become frustrated too quickly, and much more satisfying. So with both portals and with food, or games and with food, we have this progression that we can create using variety and the order in which the consumer is experiencing things. So the final thing is subtlety, or using presentation to show but not tell. Which I consider a pretty important topic. So let's say we have this broccoli soup, and on the side are garlic toast. And let's say when the cook was creating this dish, the cook tried dipping the bread into the soup and found that the flavor of doing that is much more satisfying than eating the soup and the bread separately. So let's say when the chef serves this dish to the customer, they come up to the table side and they say, by the way, take that bread, dip it in the soup, and then eat it. But that's really annoying when the chef does that, and it's really obnoxious when someone tells you how you should eat your food. So, and also you're destroying any sense of discovery for the customer for this meal. And yes, food can be, there can be a sense of discovery in food. So let's use subtlety with a not so subtle statement. And so originally the bread not working. Alright, whatever. So alright, originally you have the bread to the side of the plate. And I think most people probably wouldn't dip the bread into the soup and then eat it. Personally, I wouldn't either, because it's not something that, let's say, I grew up doing. So instead of putting the bread to the side, let's say the chef puts one of the bread pieces into the soup bowl. So now, from this, the bread is absorbing the flavors of the soup, and it's creating that flavor that the chef experienced and that the chef wants the customer to experience. And when the chef serves this plate to the customer sees the bread in the soup, and they're also aware that bread probably gets soggy over time, so they think, crap, I gotta get that thing out before it gets too soggy. So there's a good chance that the bread will be tasted first, and the customer experiences the flavor that the chef wanted them to experience. So it's not always going to work. Maybe you have somebody that, again, is distracted. They're not focusing on the meal, so they just taste it, whatever, they put it to the side. That's okay. Because for the people that do pay attention, it's very rewarding for those that do. Because they discovered, perhaps, a new way to eat soup, and you did it without saying a damn word to the customer. And because they discovered this, it makes the dish much more memorable. So now, again, back to Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 is full of subtlety, but I'll only give one example. So in Half-Life 2, you have these things called barnacles, and usually they're attached to a ceiling. And here's what it looks like in game. And let's say when a new player sees this, it's not very obvious what it does, especially if you haven't played the first Half-Life and you're playing Half-Life 2 like I did. Maybe the tongue looks around or something. And it's not very fair to the player to sacrifice their health or their shield to discover what this thing does, because health and shield are pretty pretty important. So you don't want the player to sacrifice any health or shield, but you still want to give them the opportunity to discover what this thing does. And Half-Life 2 uses a bird. And this is actually what happens. So this is the corner that you're going to round to see the barnacle. And you come across this bird that's in the lower right. So what the bird does is it starts flying away, and then it gets caught in the tongue. And then the player sees the bird drag up with the tongue, and then it goes om nom nom on the bird. Now, if say Half-Life 2 was designed today and not by Valve, as you rounded that corner to see the barnacle, a cutscene would trigger. And what the cutscene would show is the bird, and then it'd show the bird fly into the tongue, zoom in on the bird, and then it'd show it lift up to the barnacle's mouth, and then it'd do like a camera shake while the barnacle eats the bird. And to me, this is one of the worst things you can do, is to show it through a cutscene. So what a cutscene does is it tells the player what to focus on. And because it does that, it eliminates any sense of discovery, of finding something out for yourself. And cutscene also takes away control from a player. And it's what the game is implicitly implying when it does that is we don't expect the intelligence or the focus of the player, so we're going to baby you and tell you what to focus on. And it is annoying, obnoxious, and stupid, just like the chef coming to your tableside. So what Half-Life does is it uses subtlety. It uses show, don't tell. So when you round the corner, the flying bird is the only thing that's moving in your view, and motion creates attraction. So it has a chance to draw your attention. The bird is pretty black, and compared to the background that it's on, it's light. So again, that contrast draws your attention to it. And the bird also squawks when it hits the tongue and is being dragged up. So again, the sound draws your attention. So all these sort of hint the player on what to focus on, but it's not taking control away from you, and it's not being obnoxious or annoying. And mixed results are inevitable. I watched a Let's Play of this section where the guy saw this little skull on the ground and just looked at the skull rather than the bird and missed the whole thing. But that's okay, because for the people that do focus, it's very rewarding that they discover something new. And without the game saying a word to them, it just hinted, and it makes the game more memorable, and actually makes learning more memorable too. Yeah. So in both food and games, we can use subtlety to sort of encourage a new concept. That's it. Yeah.